It is a real pleasure to welcome Masha Gessen back to Politics and Prose. Not only is she an exceptional journalist and writer, I have to say she is a master of good timing. Um, the, the last, I just want to point out some of you may have been here the last time Masha was here. The last time she was here was almost exactly 2 years ago, and she was here to talk about her book called "The Man Without a Face," which is about Vladimir Putin. And that event happened to be one day after the election in Russia that returned Putin to the presidency for 6 years. As you probably know, if you've read the book, and if you haven't, I highly recommend that you do. It's become one of the most acclaimed and thorough examinations of how Putin, an unremarkable former KGB colonel and city bureaucrat in St. Petersburg, a man without a face, could not only ascend to leadership of Russia, but do so while fooling much of the West in the process. After that book, in 2012, Masha turned her attention to the Russian feminist performing arts troupe Pussy Riot, several of whose members were arrested after an unauthorized protest performance at the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow. They were subjected to a sham trial later that year. Two were imprisoned by the Putin regime. Masha, however, was able to conduct extensive interviews with the Pussy Riot members and others connected to the troupe during that entire ordeal. And her new book, Words Will Break Cement, The Passion of Pussy Riot, was published in January of this year. We were actually just talking about how it was supposed to come out about now, and actually came out a bit earlier because of events with Pussy Riot. She can explain where the title comes from, Words Will Break Cement. It chronicles the origins of Pussy Riot, its motivations, and evolution into an internationally known voice for Russian dissidents. But beyond that, and it is a really fascinating story in itself, and by the way, when you get to the parts about the trial, it does get kind of chilling. It also tells us a great deal about the role of art in shaping political protest, and that's sort of a very important subtext of the book. Once again, her timing for publication was impeccable. The book came out just a few weeks after Putin granted amnesty to the two jailed members of Pussy Riot. Of course, this was a move widely suspected to be Putin's attempt to impress the world with his concern for human rights. But his effort, as you all know, did little to silence Pussy Riot. Since then, and that was in December, its leaders have toured the United States. They've performed at an Amnesty International concert in Brooklyn with Madonna and other stars. They have appeared on the Stephen Colbert Show, and they have made news in other ways. You probably are aware they went back to Russia during the Olympics, to Sochi, where they were detained by police under very bogus pretenses and were later attacked and horsewhipped by Cossack vigilantes. Just this week, just a few days ago, literally 2 days ago, I think, 5 men doused them with green antiseptic in a McDonald's restaurant in the city of Nizhny Novgorod. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. But much of this latest... Did I pronounce it? Yeah, okay. See? What do you know? Totally luck. Much of the latest news about Pussy Riot, of course, has been overshadowed by events in Ukraine and Putin's attempt to regain control of Crimea. And once again, Masha's work is not only current and relevant, but I would say essential. Essential to understanding what happens when the passions and beliefs of idealistic people, be they a performance art troupe in Moscow or democracy activists in Kiev, collide with one of the most repressive, ruthless, and corrupt regimes in the world. And I just want to conclude by saying that it takes extraordinary and immense courage to do the kind of reporting and advocacy that Masha Gessen has done throughout her career, not only for democracy and human rights, but also for LGBT issues, and much of it in Russia. Dealing with Putin, as I think we can all imagine, is not for the weak-kneed nor faint of heart. Masha has recently had to relocate to this country for the safety of her family. So I hope all of you will join me not only in welcoming Masha back to PNP, but in thanking her for her courage and for being a beacon of light and hope for human rights activists and dissidents in Russia and beyond. Please join me in welcoming Masha.
Wow, thank you. Can I have that on my tombstone? That's, It's really wonderful to be here because, as Lisa said, the book was actually supposed to come out right around now, and this was supposed to be either the first or the second event. So I kind of feel like it's launching properly now that it's not so miserably cold out, and things are just kind of looking up, although not in Russia. Speaking of timing, it's not that my timing is so good. It's that anytime you do anything about Russia, it seems to be on time, because that country just keeps on giving. But initially, when the book about Putin came out 2 years ago, I was actually very optimistic. It was at the height of the protest movement, and it felt like the wave of protest just couldn't help but sweep him away. And actually, I learned a very important lesson with that book, which is, never publish a book with an epilogue that you just wrote. Because I pretty much stand by everything that's in that book, except for the epilogue that I wrote about the protest movement, because I was so optimistic. I still think it's a pretty good description of the protest movement, but obviously my optimism was somewhat misplaced and exaggerated. But at the time I was still very optimistic, and I was hoping that my next book would be The Decline and Fall. And so I kept documenting things that were going on and taking notes and blogging, thinking that this was all sort of saving string for the Decline and Fall book. And the first time I actually began to doubt that it was going to be a Decline and Fall book was on March 4th, 2012, when Putin declared his re-election to office. That was a foregone conclusion. But on the very same day, 3 women who were accused of participating in the Pussy Riot protest, and I'll explain why I'm saying this in such a convoluted way, but 3 women who were accused of participating in the Pussy Riot protest in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow were arrested. It was very clear that this was not going to be one of the kinds of arrests that we had seen before, where people would be detained and get 15 days administrative arrest, which is way too much for peaceful protest. Nobody should be getting administrative arrest for peaceful protest. But this was going to be different. This was not going to be administrative arrest. This was going to be a criminal case, a felony trial, and actual jail time. And that's when I started following Pussy Riot, and it's clear to me now, it actually became clear very fast, that this was the beginning of the crackdown. And if we think about it, it's mind-boggling. 2 years ago, people weren't getting jail time for peaceful protest. And now it seems like it's not an acceptable thing, but it's an accepted thing. We know that in Russia people go to jail for peaceful protest. And since Pussy Riot went to jail, people have gone to jail for much longer, also for peaceful protest. So that was why I started following them. And after a while it became clear that this was the perfect story to tell the story, not unfortunately of the decline and fall, but of the crackdown. And it sort of distills the issues of the Putin era, it distills the issues of the protest movement, and it distills the dynamics of the crackdown. And of course the trial, which takes up a large part of the book, and this was actually when the book ballooned, the initial idea was to make it a very quick, small paperback. And then as I was writing the chapter on the trial, I realized that this was going to be a third of the book, and it was not going to be a small paperback. It was going to be a regular size book, although still very fast. Because in this confrontation of absolute absurdity and total, almost unchallenged lies, and the voice of reason that are the 3 women's closing statements at the end of the trial, in that confrontation is sort of Putin's Russia in a nutshell. But I also, almost coincidentally, was following Pussy Riot from very closely from the moment that I heard of the protest in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, because I was actually, I remember that moment very, very well. I was at the hospital on February 21st of 2012 because my girlfriend was giving birth. And there was a lot of waiting involved in the giving birth part when you aren't actually the one giving birth, which I had never experienced before. So I was sitting there. I couldn't concentrate on work, so I was obsessively checking news wires and social networks, and it came across the wires that Pussy Riot had staged a protest in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior, And I sort of nudged my girlfriend, who was in labor, and said, "Pussy Riot has staged a protest in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior," and did not get a reaction for some reason. But since then, I've wondered, how was it that they were on my radar at the time? Like, how did I know who Pussy Riot were? And that was sort of part of what I was trying to investigate in the book. And to put it more in a less comical way, but in a sort of grander way, but that I think is also correct, I ultimately came to the conclusion that what they created was a great work of art. And by a great work of art, I mean, on the one hand, something that challenges, that makes people think, that makes people re-examine their assumptions. And on the other hand, and this is extremely important, something that produces images and concepts that help us understand reality. And what ended up happening was that the work of art that they created was the protest in the Cathedral of Christ the Savior and the trial, and sort of the whole period in between. And that entire large work of art created a mechanism for understanding Putin's Russia. So I went back to try to study their life stories and the story of the group. The group, as I quickly discovered, didn't exist. Well, I mean, it did, sort of, but Pussy Riot was a fictional character. The way that it came to be was that two of the people who would go on to be Pussy Riot, Nadezhda Tolokonnikova, Nadia, and Yekaterina Samutsevich, also known as Kat, were asked to do a presentation at a conference of opposition activists outside of Moscow. This was September 2011. It was before the protest movement became a mass movement, quite unexpectedly. It was kind of a depressing time. It was rather hopeless. There were very, very few people who were participating in any of this. And they even called the conference the Last Autumn, for which I have no explanation. It's a quote from a song, but I still have no explanation for it. But and at this last autumn conference, Nadia was free to do whatever she wanted, and what she decided to do was give a presentation. She's very much a scholar. She was a philosophy student at Moscow University at the time. And so she did what scholars do. She gave a presentation on the topic that fascinated her most at the time and that she had been reading most about, which was feminist art. And so she put together a very good slide presentation that sort of crammed the contents of a freshman course on feminist art, if a freshman course in feminist art could in fact exist in Russia, into about an hour and a half. And she realized as she was putting it together that there was a problem with this presentation, which was that it contained no Russian artists. It was all Western artists. There's one Russian artist named Yelena Kovylina who's terrific, but she had been working for a long time, and she was very commercial, and clearly she needed something else. And well, if there was nothing else, she could make it up. So she and Kat made up a group called Pussy Riot. Pussy is a Russian word for genitals. It's a very childish word. It's like wee riot, and this was a brilliant imaginary art collective that did all sorts of things. It did visual art. It remade classic paintings by placing sort of dirty dishes and laundry in the painting, and it also created punk rock music. Now that was a bit of a problem because neither Kat nor Nadia knew anything about music. Nadia had actually taken piano lessons as a child, had not enjoyed it, although excelled at it as she excelled at everything. But and Kat knew absolutely nothing about music. She was a software engineer who had become a photographer. So what they did was actually very punk. They took a song by a punk group called the Cockney Rebels, and they recorded on a dictaphone the lyrics that they overlaid on it. And they aren't actually sung. If you look up the first Pussy Riot song, it's sort of recitation. I mean, they couldn't sing. So, and the lyrics were basically a caricature of what a feminist punk collective would sing if a feminist punk collective existed in Russia. So it began with stinky socks, and it ended with the line, "Envy your own fucking penis." And what they did is they gave their presentation, and then they said, Nadia said, and amazingly, there is in fact a feminist punk rock collective working in Nizhny Novgorod. Nizhny Novgorod, obviously becomes a theme here. But Nizhny Novgorod is a large city, but the third largest city in Russia, picked at random at that point, working in Nizhny Novgorod right now. And we're going to leave you with a song of theirs, she said. So she turned on the boombox, and the sound of something very much like 1,000 rusty nails against a blackboard came out, and she and Kat sort of slunked out of the room as the audience of about 40 people looked absolutely flabbergasted, and mostly men. They had no idea what hit them. They had no idea what they were supposed to do in this situation. Unfortunately, I don't know what they ended up doing because whoever was videotaping this left with Nadia and Kat. So, which was kind of a perfect scene for the film she ended up doing. But I don't know what happened. Whether somebody had the courage to stand up and turn off the boombox, or whether they actually got to your own fucking penis. So. After that, they actually decided that they liked this idea. Both Nadia and Kat had taken part in another very interesting Russian protest art collective called Vaina, which means war, which had broken apart mostly because of personal conflict a couple of years earlier, and they were sort of kind of trying to keep it going, their faction going, and another faction was often in St. Petersburg doing their own thing. But really, they hadn't sort of found their footing after the breakup of Vaina. Now suddenly they had this idea that Pussy Riot wasn't such a bad idea. So they decided that they would record a song as Pussy Riot, and that's when they started thinking of the imagery and the principles of Pussy Riot. At that time, still Pussy Riot, and they had toyed with the idea of anonymity in Vaina. Vaina was actually a very personalized group, but they had discussed the idea that having an anonymous group would be interesting, and they had actually discussed the idea of wearing masks. But what they had talked about was wearing black ski masks like the Russian SWAT teams wear, which didn't seem very appealing at this point. So they decided they would wear neon-colored masks, and that's how the balaclavas appeared. And, well, if they were going to wear the balaclavas, then they should wear something else that was brightly colored. And that's how they came up with the idea of tights and dresses. They always had to wear dresses to point out the fact that this was a girl group. So, and everything had to be mismatched. That was sort of a principle of the group. And they also had to wear garish makeup. And I actually couldn't figure it out. At first I was like, why would you wear makeup when you're wearing balaclavas? But actually, if you look at the pictures, if the makeup is really ridiculous, then it shows through very well through the eye and mouth slits. So that was going to be Pussy Riot, and anonymity was going to be a guiding principle. So it was going to be an open membership collective, and you're only Pussy Riot when you're wearing the balaclava. It's like Spider-Man. You take off the balaclava, you're no longer Pussy Riot. Which is why they've always been careful to talk about Pussy Riot in the third person. This was a little bit confusing to me when I was reporting the story, because the first few people that I interviewed about Pussy Riot, who seemed to have intimate knowledge of the group, but always talked about it in the third person, I was sort of trying to pinpoint their role in it, and they would be very elusive about it. And then finally I realized that anybody who talked like that was actually Pussy Riot of some sort. It was going to be open membership, it was going to be anonymous, it was going to be a girl group. They needed some musicians if they were going to be a punk group. So they called a woman who had also taken part in Vaina, who was actually a musician. And so she helped them master the soundtrack for the next recording. The lyrics got a little bit more pointed and less ridiculous. Their first, and the final product, this is important, the final product of their actions would always be the video clip. This is something that was also the case with Vaina. The action itself was not performed for an audience. So in fact, they would take issue with the idea that they performed at the concert in Brooklyn, because they don't actually perform at concerts. They don't exist as a group, as a performing group. They exist as an imaginary group that shows up in these video clips. And usually the video clips document a series of performances of the same song. So the first series was recorded in the Moscow Metro. If anybody has ever seen the Moscow Metro, it's It's like a whole bunch of concert halls that are built underground and that have trains going through them. And they're really begging to be performed in. And this was something that Pussy Riot noticed. They weren't the first ones to notice it, but they noticed it, and they also noticed that when they built those utopian subway stations, they didn't think about the fact that they had light fixtures at the height of 100 yards, and somebody had to go up there and change the light bulbs. So a lot of these subway stations have these really makeshift platforms that are like scaffolding on wheels that are used for changing light bulbs or for taking down helium balloons that go up to the ceiling and that sort of thing. And they really make a perfect stage. And they also make a perfect stage because you cannot be taken off this platform without endangering your life and the life of the policeman who's removing you. And this was one of the guiding principles of Pussy Riot. They generally tried to find elevated platforms from which they could not be removed without danger to them or to the police. This was a principle that they violated when they went to the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. And it wasn't the only time they violated it, but it was one of the times. So they recorded this the song "Free the Cobblestone" in the metro. In the process, they got detained a couple of times, and one time some media got wind of the fact that Petya Verzilov, who's Nadia's husband, and Nadia had been detained while performing in the metro. So they thought it was a new Vaina action and called them in to talk about it. And they said, no, actually we were witnessing a performance by a new group called Pussy Riot, and that's when Pussy Riot became Pussy Riot. Because it obviously sounds better, and that's when it first got on somebody's radar. So they released that clip to Free the Cobblestone. Their next one was a series of performances in fashion shows. They accidentally set a fashion show on fire while recording it, and in the luxury pedestrian mall in Moscow. This was called Kropotkin Vodka. Where Kropotkin is Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist prince, and vodka is vodka, and also is a symbol of unbridled consumption in Putin's Russia. So it was very much this leftist critique of Putin's Russia, which is also very unusual. And while they were running away from having set the fashion show on fire, they took the metro to Kropotkinska, named for Peter Kropotkin, and when they got off at Kropotkinska, they ended up right in front of Cathedral of Christ the Savior. And the Cathedral of Christ the Savior is the biggest cathedral in Russia. It is the most hideous structure in the entire city, and that is saying a lot. It was built on the site where a fairly hideous, but not quite as hideous, cathedral had existed in the early 20th century. It had been blown up by Stalin in the 1930s, and there had been a swimming pool there. So it was sort of it was downgraded to a literal depression. It was an outdoor swimming pool on that site. And then after the Soviet Union collapsed, a cathedral was once again built where the swimming pool used to be, where the cathedral used to be, and the cathedral is, it's enormous. You can see it from most places in the center of Moscow. It looks too large. It has too much gilt. It's where the officials like to go when on church holidays and to have the television cameras film them. Standing next to their wives on church holidays. It's where the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church officiates during church holidays. And it is where the Virgin's Girdle was at the time that they were filming the Kropotkin Vodka clip. The Virgin's Girdle is a relic that is usually rests at a monastery in Greece. And it had been touring Russia, and Russians had been lining up to touch the Virgin's Girdle because it was said to cure infertility among other ills. So 1 million people are said to have stood in line outside the Cathedral of Christ the Savior in Moscow to get to the girdle. So here they are, they're running away from having set this ridiculous fashion show on fire in that part of Moscow that is only a few minutes away, where there are all these luxury boutiques where the Bentley's showroom is, and the Bentleys sell out for cash before they're actually delivered. And they come out of the metro and see a million people standing there in line. Well, not a million people at a time, but tens of thousands of people at a time, standing there in line in the freezing rain, waiting to touch the Virgin Girl. And this was something that they sort of fixed in their minds, that this was a mind-boggling contrast in this bizarre city. And then something very strange happened. A few weeks later, a couple of weeks later, which is the Russian protest movement began, which no one expected to happen. There had been protests, and actually the participants of Pussy Riot, of whom at this point there were maybe 7 or 8 people, they had been going to those protests, most of them, and usually there were like 300 people there. And all of a sudden, to the protest that was scheduled for the day after the parliamentary election, which was rigged like the election before it and the election before it, all of a sudden 10,000 people showed up. And it was a completely different story. And then to the next protest, 50,000 people showed up. And then 100,000 people showed up. And that was the protest movement that I mentioned earlier that felt like it was going to sweep Putin away. Petya was arrested and given 10 days administrative arrest at that first protest where 10,000 people showed up. And Pussy Riot, he was arrested along with about 100 other men, and they were kept in one detention center. They still talk about it as though it had been the best time of their lives. Because, when you've been living in isolation, when you think that there are only 2 or 3 other people, your closest friends, who share your political beliefs, and all of a sudden you're sharing a jail cell with 30 other people who share your political beliefs, and you haven't met them before, it is exhilarating. And that's what happened to those men. So they were having the time of their lives in those jail cells. And Pussy Riot came and performed on the roof of a garage outside the holding facility. It's the only performance they've ever done. The only actual performance for an audience, a captive audience as it happens. And it actually made them uncomfortable when they realized after they left that something had gone wrong. It wasn't what they were supposed to be doing. And this was just one of the things that sort of caused them to doubt that they could go on as before. Now, remember, they've done 2 actions, and now this is their 3rd, and now they're wondering whether they should be going on as before. But with the start of the protest movement, protest art, which had been an extremely unusual thing and radical by definition, suddenly became a thing. Suddenly everybody was doing protest art. I was coordinating a clearinghouse called the Protest Workshop, where hundreds of people a week would come with proposals of actions to do. Most of them were protest art of some sort or another. So all of a sudden, Pussy Riot was just one of many groups doing protest art. They're too ambitious and too determined, and by determined I mean determined to push the limits of protest. So if the boundaries have suddenly expanded, they need to find the new boundaries and push them. So they actually took a hiatus for about a month at the height of the protest movement. And finally they realized they had to perform in Red Square. And that's the picture on the cover of the book. That's the performance in the action in Red Square, which I think is certainly the most spectacular action they've done. This was done in minus 20 weather. And the song that they're performing is Putin Pissed Himself. And they're on an elevated platform that's also iced over, so they can't be taken down. So they actually performed the whole song, which some of them regretted because it was really cold. They were wearing these ridiculous dresses, and they really wished they could already go to the police precinct to warm up, which of course ended up happening. And at the police precincts, the police didn't know what to do with them, whether to treat them as protesters or as prostitutes. Now, they kind of looked like both, and they arrest both in Red Square, but then they process them differently. So they held them for a few hours, and they printed out pictures that they had taken of them while they were performing. They all looked at the pictures together, the women and the police, and then they basically parted ways. And then they had a bigger problem, which is how do you top Red Square? And the only way to top Red Square is to go to the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. And this was actually an important turning point for them, because some of the people did not want to go to the Cathedral of Christ the Savior. They felt it was dangerous. They felt it was pushing things too far, that it would offend too many people, and the rest felt that offending a number of people was sort of the point. If you don't jolt people, you don't get your message across. And the message was very simple. At this point, it was 2 weeks to the scheduled election. Putin was getting very nervous and aggressive faced with the protest movement. He turned to the Orthodox Church, which Russian politicians and Soviet politicians have always done in times of crisis. And the patriarch of the Russian Orthodox Church was campaigning for him, comparing him to God, directing parish priests to tell their parishioners not to attend protests because Orthodox believers do not go to protests. And Pussy Riot went to the Cathedral of Christ the Savior to protest the symbiosis of church and state, which is kind of a sacred thing in Russia. And of course, the song they wrote is called the Punk Prayer. They appealed obviously to the Virgin. The girdle was gone by this point, but the spirit of the Virgin was still there. So they appealed to the Virgin to become a feminist and to chase Putin out. And at the cathedral, they were only able to perform to lip sync for about 40 seconds before they were removed by security. They knew this was going to happen, so they actually filmed footage at a different church beforehand, which is how they were able to produce the clip. So they're removed by security and basically thrown out. And then a few days later, the police started a criminal case against them. 3 of them went into hiding together, and 2 sort of split off, spread the rumor quite effectively that they had left the country, did not actually leave the country. But the 3 women who went into hiding together were caught together 2 weeks later and arrested, held in pretrial detention for 6 months, tried in what can only be described as a witch trial. Just to give you a few examples, and basically the trial, it was basically a blasphemy trial. The judge and the prosecution, and they've worked very much together on this, did everything to obscure the political nature of the trial. Almost no one was allowed to quote the lyrics. Putin's name, from what I can tell from the transcripts, was pronounced once during the entire trial. And the judge would keep cutting them off every time they tried to ask the witnesses or the so-called victims what the actual lyrics of the song were. The victims were staff and volunteers of the Cathedral of Christ the Savior who testified that witnessing the performance and or watching the clip on YouTube over and over again had traumatized them and rendered them unable to work. And the testimony, it was really hard to condense this, because actually I still think that there could be a book that's just the trial transcript. It would be a pretty thick volume, and it could be read through. It was really hard. What I ended up putting in the book was essentially a day's transcript, plus tidbits from a couple of other days, plus their closing statements. And it still reads like a long Ionescu play. And some of the testimony, for example, one victim is testifying and the judge says, so they were crossing themselves? Did they cross themselves like regular Orthodox believers? And the witness says, well, I don't know, kind of fast. And then another witness says they went up on the solias, the platform in front of the altar, and they started jerking devilishly. Now, the defense attorneys, who totally were out of their depth and fell right into this whole witch trial trap, one of the defense attorneys stands up and says, I want to know how the witness can characterize the jerkings as devilish. How does she know how the devil jerks? Has she seen the devil? In another instance, a witness testifies that they were possessed. The judge objects and says, witness does not have a medical degree and cannot render a diagnosis of possession. So at the end of this trial, these women say their closing statements, which are included in the book in their entirety, and are also sort of, they have total independent value as documents and as pieces of writing. How they were able to produce these documents while living through this trial and basically being tortured every day. This was, they would be awakened at 5 in the morning to go to the courthouse. They would be taken in unventilated prisoner transports. They would be kept in unair-conditioned rooms. They were not properly hydrated because they couldn't drink because they didn't know whether they would be given bathroom breaks. They couldn't eat very much for the same reason, and also because they couldn't drink very much. It was extremely hot. It's August in Moscow. And the judge was trying to cram the trial into as few days as possible. So she would start at 10 in the morning and end at 10 in the evening, because it's illegal under Russian law to go past 10 in the, to have judicial procedure after 10 in the evening. So she would go straight to 10 in the evening. So then they would be held for a while, then they would be taken in the prisoner transport back to jail. They would get to jail after midnight. They would have a couple of hours of sleep, basically. And then the next day would start all over again. How they were able, under those conditions, to produce these closing statements, which after this 9 days of theater of the absurd, suddenly are the voice of reason. Suddenly they explained, they took very different tacks, all three of them, but all of them explained what's wrong with the country and why they did what they did. And to finish my part of the story and open up to questions, I want to say that the words will break cement comes from Nadia's closing statement, but it's a quote. She's quoting Solzhenitsyn, who said, "But in the end, I believe words will break cement." So 50 years later, in a trial that's very reminiscent, except even more primitive than the trials of 50 years earlier, Nadia repeats the same statement, sort of optimistically, but I think incredibly depressingly for how much time has passed and how little has changed. So, questions? Thank you.
I wondered if you ever had a conversation with them about how they are the incarnation of Anna Akhmatova, and if that so much of what they seem to be about, both her and Dadaism, seems to be both. They're really talking of this from the soul of the Russian people, and were they conscious of that?
I'm not sure I agree with that premise. Yeah, I'm not sure they're the incarnation of Anna Akhmatova. But why do you say that?
Well, I was thinking in terms of, as much as Akhmatova was very much a thorn in Stalin's side, and was untouchable from his point of view, that she would speak from the soul of the Russian people.
Well, I think most artists working in any nation try to speak from the soul of the people. Akhmatova was not a protester. She was a great poet, but she was, by, I think, temperament and circumstance, not a protester. So, I don't think it's a great comparison. I mean, they're all female, but and they all lived in Russia.
Oh.
Sorry.
I was here and heard your talk about your book on Putin, and I was personally very concerned about your safety. And in 2012, in St. Petersburg, I asked an architecture friend, who turned out to be a friend of yours, how you did it, and he said, You didn't seem to be concerned. You were biking around Moscow. How did you do it?
I like biking. It's my preferred method of transport. Also, Moscow, as you might know, is in permanent traffic gridlock. So if I want to get places, I have to bike. It's not that that I was completely unconcerned for my safety. When I was writing the Putin book, I was actually very careful. No one knew I was writing the Putin book, except for my editor, and she was even not allowed to refer to it as the Putin book in emails. And my girlfriend knew that I was writing the Putin book, and that's it. Not even my best friend knew I was writing the Putin book. So I felt, and I think it turned out to be right, that as long as the book came out before it came to light, I was probably pretty safe. And I'm certainly, having published a book that was translated into 20 languages, I was a lot safer than a lot of journalists in Russia who are not in the Western media and who nobody would bother looking for if they disappeared. And I certainly know a lot of cases, and I know some people personally who've been attacked and beaten and threatened, who I think were at much greater risk because they didn't have as high a profile as I do. So I felt reasonably safe after the book came out. When things got really difficult was when the anti-gay campaign started, and that's when I started getting 10 times as many death threats as I ever got when I was just an opposition journalist. And I really did become concerned that somebody would think it was his patriotic duty to get rid of me. Not that Putin would order my murder, but that there was so much of how I was personally out to destroy the Russian Orthodox family and hated the Russian people, that somebody would want to take care of me. And then, of course, after several politicians made it clear that they intended to go after my kids, we packed up and left the country. It was pretty fast. I mean, a year ago today, we weren't even talking about leaving the country. And now we've permanently settled in New York. Yes.
Hi. I have a question. For example, Yeltsin, he slept with a gun, as I know. Did you
Say that again?
With a gun?
Yeah,
Gun?
Oh, Yeltsin.
Yeltsin. Yeah, he slept with a gun for his own security. Did you sleep with a gun for your own security?
No, my preferences run in a different direction.
No.
No,
No, because
I do not sleep with a gun. I don't think I would be able to protect myself physically if I were attacked. I think I'm also a former war reporter, so I don't believe in being armed. I don't believe in body armor. I believe in running fast and riding my bike, and that's just. I mean, it's actually. I have thought about it, and I did talk to other people about it. Some people I know have bodyguards. I thought a bodyguard, first of all, would be incompatible with my lifestyle because I like to bicycle, and also because I just think it's useless. So no gun.
Thank you.
Hello. I just finished reading your book, and yes, the trial sequence is pretty incredible, even for one who's read a fair amount of Russian history and literature. My question, though, I had the impression that when they undertook this endeavor, it was pretty disorganized, and they were an odd grouping of people, and maybe that's because it was hard to explain it all. And then I felt as if the main protagonists, their convictions grew as time went on, at least as they were portrayed. And in fact, the stuff about prison conditions at the end was very interesting. But I didn't get the feeling that they were more seemed more like kind of lost souls or semi-lost souls in the beginning. Could you comment?
Well, I don't know that I would go so far as to. I mean, first of all, with the trial sequence, I just want to say I can't take any credit for that. I mean, that wrote itself. I just I spent a lot of time with audio and videotapes and putting it together, but there's no writing there, and unfortunately, it is the best part of the book. But I don't know that they were lost souls. I think it's fair to say, first of all, there were Nadia was 22 when she was arrested. Maria was 23. They were college students, and they had staged a prank. And I think as pranks go, it was incredible. It was a brilliant prank. It was extremely well thought out. It was spectacular. It was well articulated. But it was a prank. I mean, they didn't expect to go to jail for it for 2 years. They expected it to be noticed. They expected it to make people think. They were doing protest art very much in the tradition of Riot Girls. When they were put in prison, they became political activists. And gradually, I think they realized that they were political activists to a greater extent than they were political artists. It was an easier transition for Maria, who came from an activist background and became a protest artist as an activist. It was more difficult for Nadia, who continued to think of herself as an artist, and but was a political. And it was also very difficult for her to think of herself as an artist. And this is kind of funny because she was in prison with women who thought that artists were, either they made classical paintings or, well, maybe they would like sing classical music or pop music, but certainly whatever she did was not art as far as they were concerned. So in that context, it was very difficult for her to identify as an artist because she couldn't do anything in terms of art to affect her environment, and she couldn't be accepted as an artist by the people around her. She was very reluctant to accept the identity of an activist and a political prisoner while she was in prison. But when she finally embraced it, and that happens at the end of the book, when she writes her open letter about prison conditions as she's going on hunger strike, I mean, that's an incredible document, and it's also an incredible piece of writing, which amazed me because she actually is not a great writer. She's a remarkable thinker, but she's one of those people who have so many thoughts in their heads that it's very difficult for, and they're so complicated, and and she doesn't have time to explain the entire logic of her thinking. So actually, that doesn't make for great writing. I had been corresponding with her for almost the entire time that she was in jail, and then this letter comes out. Petya sent it to me for translation. We decided that I was helping him release it to the Western media. There I was working in the middle of the night reading this letter, just absolutely amazed. And I was especially amazed because I knew how it was written. It was written in scraps. She was, some of it she would dictate to Petya when he came to see her, and some of it she would write on scraps of paper and pass to him. And then he sort of compiled it all and released it as a letter. It's an incredible document. I think it's some of the most powerful writing about Russian prisons since Solzhenitsyn.
Could I just ask how much, if any, of this has come out in the media or something in Russia, and will your book be available, or are we back to samizdat? I mean, the book, the Putin book has not been translated into Russian. It's been translated into just about every language in the world except Russian. There were 3 publishers who made offers on it and then retracted them after reading the book and asked for my understanding in why they were doing it. I was recently asked for permission to translate another book of mine that's not political, a book about medical genetics, and I realized that actually I'm not going to let any Russian publisher publish any book of mine until the Putin book is published in Russian. So that was my answer. So
Until the Putin book comes out in Russian, nothing else is coming out in Russian. As far as what's come out in the Russian media, I mean, the bulk of the Russian media is state television that is fully controlled by the state, right? And it beams out to 98% of the households, and to people who get their information from state television, that's a majority of people. Pussy Riot are a bunch of women who went into a church and defecated. Now, how that happened is interesting, because the only part of the lyrics that Russian television reporters quoted over and over and over again is one of the refrains, and it's "holy shit, holy shit, holy shit." So eventually it went into a church and defecated. Most Russians do not realize it was a political protest. Most Russians do believe it was an act of gratuitous blasphemy. But most Russians know who Pussy Riot are. And that's why I think they're in such danger now, and that's why they keep getting attacked. And for the consumers of independent media, they certainly not only know what Pussy Riot did and what they have to say now, but I think for a lot of people, it was an important transformative process, because a lot of people in the sort of independent media target audience were offended by this action, were offended by. I mean, this again. I'll just take a second to explain this. This was at the height of the protest movement, and the protest movement had its own rules. There was a sort of tacit understanding that as long as the protesters obeyed by a set of arbitrary rules imposed by the government, that they got their permits, which were arbitrary, that they only went to the locations they were allowed to go, that they marched within the lines, that they never jumped the police cordons, then nobody would get arrested, nobody would get physically attacked. There was a very, very small minority in the protest movement that said this kind of protest is ridiculous. In fact, it's not protest. Protest is when you violate the rules or challenge the boundaries. And that's very much what Pussy Riot was saying and doing. But for a majority of people who sympathize with the protest movement, that was going too far. And doing it in church was really going too far. And it was only the trial, and finally their closing statements during the trial, but also their conduct throughout the trial, that made people reconsider their attitudes toward them and understand what they were doing and understand what their message was. And that's incredible. I mean, it's very rare that you see a work of art that actually gets people not only to think about things, but also to change their opinion as they witness the work of art. So. Yes.
The story that you detail is incredible. I mean, I don't even think Americans can get around it because we're not there. It shows that you really don't have that much fear, so I'm asking you to be very brave here and jump into some things. Predict, even though last time you said you were wrong, if you can or choose to, and just what you see in maybe these areas, for Pussy Riot, obviously, for protest in general in Russian, what Putin will have for dinner. No, what Putin's...
That's easy.
Putin knows what Putin will have for dinner. Anything you want to comment on Putin. And the last thing, which I think would be very interesting, Americans who are concerned about what's going on over there, not acting as a country, but as individuals, is there anything that you see that could in any way shape Russia by regular Americans doing this or not doing something?
Wow. Okay. So for my prediction for Pussy Riot, actually, I mean, it's not a prediction, it's an assessment. I think that at this point, after having served their time in jail, two of them ended up serving their sentences, they're really the first dissidents of our time, and very much in the mold of dissidents in the 70s, in the sense that they're individual actors. They have a voice of moral authority. They have access to the media in the West. They have significant power in drawing attention to particular cases, and they're learning very fast to use that power. Now, in terms of their personal safety, I'm extremely concerned. Because what I was saying earlier about the fear that I had that somebody would just decide to take care of me, well, I've left. And they're a lot more famous than I am at this point in Russia, because they've had 3 television programs devoted just to their acts of blasphemy. And so they have a lot more people who are likely to go after them in Russia, and that's exactly what we're witnessing. the horse whipping in Sochi. And then they weren't just sprayed with the ointment. They were first sprayed, and then these men came in and started screaming at them, "Get out of town!" Then they lobbed a metal jar of this ointment at Maria's head, so she actually had stitches. And they also sprayed Nadia's eyes with some kind of acid. So she has cornea damage, and she says she couldn't see for 10 minutes. What really scares me about this incident is that these young men were wearing orange and brown ribbons, which are this St. George's ribbon, which is a symbol of Russia's victory in World War II. Usually it's only worn, it's a symbol that was invented in the last 10 years, but usually it's only worn around Victory Day in May. But they put it on because that was the patriotic symbol that they could find, and that's sort of it signifies the victory in in the Great Patriotic War, which is what Russians call their part of the World War II. And so they were showing that they felt they were performing their patriotic duty. And I think there will be more people like that who will be attacking them. And they're just in constant physical danger, basically. Yes.
Time for just the people standing who are at the mics now.
Okay.
Thank you. In Man Without a Face, you noted that in 2003, with the Putin election, that the OSCE was one of the only international organizations to sort of flag concerns with that election, and we've just seen them get prohibited from entering Crimea today for the third day. And I'm just sort of curious to know, what is Masha Gessen thinking, watching all of this unfold, and any predictions? Thank you.
Well, what I'm thinking is that I'm a genius. No, I just read a blog post about this for the New York Times because I'm sort of having this moment of emigre schadenfreude because every night I come home and my girlfriend says, "You're so brilliant. You know, the ruble has crashed. You're so brilliant. Our friends got arrested again. You're a genius." And now that there's a war on, I'm really a genius to have left the country 2 months ago. No, it's what I'm really thinking is that it's not a huge surprise. This is what Putin has been doing for years. He has been ignoring and mocking and violating international law for years. It was only 6 years ago that he chopped off a piece of Georgia, and the world kind of swallowed it. And there's really no reason for him to think that he can't chop off a piece of Ukraine in the exact same way. He also has been watching his own television for almost 15 years. And that's with every passing year, he sort of becomes more indoctrinated with exactly what he's putting out and getting parroted back to him. So he absolutely believes that he's fighting American fascism by chopping off a piece of Ukraine. And actually, you haven't asked me about this, but I want to say that Putin has not lost his mind. He's not insane. I think what Angela Merkel was talking about when she said that he lives in a different world is that it's a different set of assumptions. And his assumption is that he has a right to do this. His assumption is that, and this is really important, his assumption is that everyone in the world is basically evil, and only he is honest enough to stop pretending and do exactly what he wants to and what he thinks is right. This was very much his argument when Russia kidnapped 30 Greenpeace activists in international waters in September. There was a bunch of Russian officials who said, basically publicly, they said, look, everybody in the world hates Greenpeace. Every government hates them. We're the only ones who had the courage to finally throw them in jail, having kidnapped them in international waters. After they had been in jail for nearly 2 months, the Netherlands finally filed suit in the International Tribunal on the law of the seas. Russia said, "Oh, we're not going to the tribunal." The tribunal obviously ruled against Russia, ordered the activists released and the ship released. The ship is still docked in the port of Murmansk. The activists were amnestied along with Pussy Riot and along with Mikhail Khodorkovsky solely because the Sochi Olympics were coming up. And the king and the prime minister of the Netherlands went to the Sochi Olympics. And that's, that's what I'm thinking when I'm watching Putin in Crimea. Why shouldn't he? If he's been getting away with it for so long. So. Yes.
I want to say thank you so much for your work and for coming here. I think exposing these injustices and letting the world know about this is really important. So thank you.
Thanks.
And I heard, I think, in your interview with Terry Gross a few months ago about basically what you were talking about, Putin's conception of the world as the proper East versus the decadent West, and everything that we're talking about here seems to kind of reinforce his view. How do we step out of that view and kind of let the people of Russia and Putin see that this is a different world that we're living in, not his own?
I don't think we have any chance of changing Putin's mind. And in fact, the situation has gotten pretty extreme in the sense that not only do we not have a chance of changing Putin's mind, there's really at this point nothing that the West can do strategically to stop him. That it creates a very difficult situation, but also a very simple one. And basically, the only choices at this point are moral. There's only the right thing to do and the wrong thing to do. I think that isolating him internationally is the right thing to do. Strategically, it will yield bad results, as will symbolic actions, because symbolic actions will only embolden him, as would a military response, even if it were on the table, because that would mobilize Russia further. But diplomatic and economic sanctions would at least be the right thing to do, because at least he would stop being treated like an equal and like a partner by the West. Thanks.
I recently watched the documentary Pussy Riot, A Punk Prayer, and something that really struck me was when Pussy Riot was talking about kind of the process of the trial and how incredibly misunderstood they felt, in that just sort of people didn't understand their message because it was such a new, it came in such a new form in this sort of protest art. And during your talk, you talked about how you're in this kind of group that helped people come in and give their kind of proposals of the kind of protest that they could establish. And my question is how you see kind of these kind of protest art movements developing, the direction of them in Russia, and maybe sort of more broadly, if you can talk about just sort of young people and Russian citizens and how empowered they feel and kind of bringing about change in the country.
Right. Actually, I mean, the pain of being misrepresented and misunderstood and lied about in the trial is still palpable for them. Mm-hmm. It was really, they didn't realize that could happen. I mean, we read the trial transcript like it's a theater of the absurd production. They were inside it. And their defense lawyers weren't helping. But it's not so much that they didn't, that they presented their message in such a new radical form that it wasn't understood. It was that they were being purposefully misrepresented. They were accused of felony hooliganism, accused and found guilty of felony hooliganism, which is a crude disturbance of the social order that is motivated by hatred. So what they were convicted of specifically was staging their protest motivated by hatred for Russian Orthodox believers. For Maria especially, but really for all of them, it was really important that they have no hatred. They don't have a hateful body in their hateful bone in their bodies. In fact, they're punks. They're sort of the opposite of hateful people, and that I think was extremely painful for them. If their political beliefs had been put on trial, if their action had been put on trial as they intended it, or as it actually happened, I think they wouldn't have felt as betrayed and lied to and lied about. So that was very disempowering for them, but it was also very disempowering for everybody who watched this trial. So the answer to the second part of your question is it's very, very depressing right now. I mean, I think hope has just sort of gone out of that balloon.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.